You've heard us talk about the decline in licensed games based on movies in the past, and while that's certainly strange for someone my age to see, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Sure, many of those games are of crappy quality, but long before consoles gave up on Marvel, DC, and Lord of the Rings games that didn't star Lego figures, games based on horror movies faded into obscurity. Oh sure, the horror genre is alive and well, but it's doing so with zero synergy from Hollywood horror. It would seem murder simulators have fallen out of fashion over the last decade, but that certainly wasn't the case in the 80s. And we're here to offer proof that horror heroes, slasher stars, and unholy monsters were just as prominent as first-person shooters are today. Put out that joint and put your shirt back on because we're about to reveal the top 5 least scary games based on classic horror films.
Number 5.
Outside of Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and depressing documentaries about third world genocides, Jason Voorhees quite possibly boasts the biggest body count in film history. Cinema's most famous machete-wielding, hockey mask-wearing, slow-moving behemoth has terrorized young adults throughout a dozen movies, so yeah, it's a little surprising that an immortal monster so very prone to sequelization has only appeared in 2 games in the last 30 years, the NES version being the absolute silliest. In one of the most famously obtuse games ever produced by famously obtuse game publisher LJN, the Nintendo's Friday the 13th has been baffling Jason fans for almost 3 generations. You play as one of 6 camp counselors apparently tasked with actually seeking out Jason, presumably to kill him to death? With the help of one of the most confusing maps in video game history, you can switch between playable teens in hopes of getting closer to Voorhees, and even chase the axe-tossing psychopath by throwing rocks and blades. We started this game at the top simply because the randomness of Jason's appearance can in fact create a few legitimate, if not cheap, scares. I wish we could say the same for the remaining games on this list.
Number 4.
Vlad, you made it to the next century. Anyway, you know Count Dracula, right? Thank God, because this game is not based on any of his movies specifically, but it's worth highlighting for one particularly great reason. Unlike every other game on this list, and unlike every other stupid forgettable game starring Dracula, playable or otherwise,
What is a man?
I sincerely doubt you've ever heard of this one. 1982's Dracula for the Mattel Intellivision. No wait, don't run to your Wikipedia just yet to look up what Intellivision is. That's not important. Never was, never will be. No, this Dracula game is amazing because even though it's not based on any Dracula movie in particular, it's one of the only games I've ever seen that lets you play as Dracula. The predatory, homophobia-inducing creature of the night is now in your hands. When night falls, you roam the streets, mouth agape, ready to chomp the necks of unwitting civilians. However, Drac must duck constables and wolf creatures who apparently do their bidding. Whatever. Thankfully, he's got the power to turn into a massive bat when he wants to get the hell out of Dodge, Sylvania. Don't get me wrong, I love the ability to play as the big bad here, but I doubt this is that playable today, for numerous reasons, not the least of which is that most kids today have seen better graphics on middle school scoreboards.
Number 3.
With so very many sequels, reboots, and bizarre disappearances, Michael Myers has one of the most confusing legacies in film history. No, not that one. Either way, it's somewhat sad to see that this 10-movie-strong Halloween series only managed to manifest itself into a single game. Oh yes, we're talking about yet another Atari 2600 game, this one from the year of 1983, whose packaging was so authentic it required an extra call-out. Similar to the plot of the original film, you play as Laurie Strode, babysitter extraordinaire, charged with leading children to safety in the largest, most garishly painted house in the universe. But there's a catch. The only way you can move on to further levels is by stabbing Mike Myers with a knife. No, not that one. Which in a way makes every stage something of a canonical sequel.
Number 2.
Look, I'll admit I'm a little bit biased here, but when it comes to horror villains, there was no one more godlike, no one scarier than Freddy Krueger to me as a kid. Michael Myers left me with a wow, sucks to be you, Jamie Lee Curtis vibe. I figured I could dodge Jason Voorhees as long as I stayed away from Crystal Lake and premarital sex, and Chucky was just plain fucking silly. But if you slept, your fear belonged to Freddy. Horror's master of dreams is without a doubt my undisputed horror hero. So it's a fucking shame to see what happened to him in 1989's A Nightmare on Elm Street, yet another monstrosity released by LGN for the NES. It's not so much that Freddy is barely in the game at all, because it kinda makes sense that he should take on an elusive Jaws type role, that's fine. It's everything in between. While walking around in the real world and the dream world, you'll encounter snakes, rats, spiders, and fucking Frankenstein and bedsheet ghosts, basically the trick-or-treaters in the Charlie Brown Halloween special. Bear in mind Freddy was 5 movies deep at this point, so it's not like they were short on dream imagery to draw from. Your goal is to enter random buildings and collect Freddy's bones for destruction like they're some sort of Horcruxes, but I will give it credit for being slightly reminiscent of Nightmare 3: The Dream Warriors, probably my favorite Freddy movie. And also to the game's credit, it's not without a certain creativity, and it was actually one of the few games that supported the NES's 4-player adapter. All that said, it's still too hard to overlook the stupidity of the design choices, given A Nightmare on Elm Street's brutal, endlessly respawning difficulty. Especially when the game originally promoted that you would be playing as Freddy himself, killing a horde of obnoxious teenagers. God damn it, that's the one I wanted.
Number 1.
For my whole life, I've heard people trip over themselves in praise of Aliens. The James Cameron actioner is undoubtedly great and has inarguably inspired the most video games, both in name and spirit. However, in my opinion, the first movie, Alien, is the superior film, and part of that has to do with it being the only Alien movie that truly lays its eggs directly in the stomach of the horror genre. It took 35 years to recreate the tone, dread, and abject fear of Ridley Scott's original with Alien's isolation, but there was in fact a first draft to that tale. Welcome back to the land of the Atari 2600, the console that seemingly had the least qualms with adapting R-rated horror into playable cartridges kids could buy at a Toys R Us. But those of you who know your gaming hardware history are probably asking, is the Atari really capable of adapting Alien to a scary video game? No, of course not! So what do? They didn't even bother. Nope, the geniuses at Fox simply decided to rip off Pac-Man for this incredibly silly-looking mazy, dot-munching monstrosity. Sure, it's not without some reasons to love it, a Freeway-esque bonus level featuring a shitload of xenomorphs, and instead of power pellets, Pac Ripley can grab a pulsar gun to fend off the alien. Cute, for sure. But you know, anyone actually scared by this goofy-ass game, raise your hand. And hit like and subscribe. Haha, got you! Just kidding. Thanks for watching, and feel free to visit LaserTimePodcast.com for more ball-shattering wonder, and also feel free to click on some of our other videos if you somehow managed to actually enjoy this one.